This week we're going to talk about communication, conflict, and negotiation. With communication, we're going to discuss a communication process and effective communication. With conflict, we're going to address a contemporary view of conflict, types of conflict, and effectively managing conflict. With negotiation, we're going to talk about the reasons we negotiate and an effective negotiation process. This slide contains key topics and terms for this chapter. I hope it will help you see how this chapter is organized and be a valuable guide to you when you're taking quizzes and exams.
The communication process can be broken down into distinct dimensions. The communication process commences when the sender contemplates sending a message to the receiver, encodes the message, which is translating thoughts into a form or language that can be understood by others, and selects the medium, which is selecting the means by which to communicate the message, whether face-to-face or by phone, text, email, etc. Selecting the appropriate medium or means of communication is essential. I will elaborate on communication channel richness on the next slide. Then the message is transmitted through the selected medium. Next, the receiver decodes the message, which is the process of interpreting and striving to understand the meaning of the message, and then sends feedback, which is when the receiver expresses reaction or no reaction. Silence is a form of feedback, and the communication process continues. At any stage in the communication process, noise can disrupt this process. Noise is anything that interferes with the transmission and understanding of a message. Take the simple example provided on this slide. The sender wants to meet at Starbucks to study and chooses to send a message through text. The receiver wonders which Starbucks and is not entirely sure which class they will study for, since they have two classes together. So noise has already been introduced into this communication. Had the receiver simply said, "Let's meet at the Starbucks in the Student Union building to study organizational behavior," much of the noise would have been eliminated. Take a more complex example. Recently, a member of my community was communicating with me about emergency preparedness in our neighborhood. I am in charge of the emergency preparedness for about 100 families in the area. He sent a text to me to see if we could chat on a special radio to verify that the radios worked and that we were prepared to share relevant information with others in our neighborhood. I responded by directing him to one of our neighbors who assists me in the emergency preparedness process, an action I have done several times in the past. However, a new policy in this area is that the person in charge is the only point of contact for the city. This meant that everything should go through me and that I should get on the call with my radio and readjust our communication path within the neighborhood, making sure that I was the only point of contact with the city. Instead of trying to communicate the new policy, why and how it came about, all to someone who was just getting to know because he was new to his position, he called me on the phone to chat about the nuances of this process. He had the tricky task of having to call me and communicate delicately that, although I had tried to delegate this to someone else, and that this was expected and understandable in the past, that the new policy no longer allowed delegating this task. He did this very effectively. I thanked him for the call, told him I agreed with the plan, and hung up being impressed with his communication skills. Had he tried to share all this information through text, it might have been confounded with noise. His appropriate choice of medium, a call instead of a text, helped him to be effective in his communication. It helped him be delicate in communicating something that was new to me and to those I was working with. Channel richness refers to the immediacy and amount of information that can be transmitted. High channel richness transmits a lot of verbal and nonverbal information and offers immediate feedback. For example, I can see your nonverbal reaction or immediately respond to clarify a point. While low channel richness is capable of transmitting a lot of written information but may be vulnerable to slow feedback. For example, I have to wait for you to respond to an email, a formal report, or even a text. With low channel richness, even when the feedback is immediate, for example, I could send an immediate response to your text. Such a medium is vulnerable to noise confounding the intent of the message. Perhaps this is one of the reasons we have emojis, to try to offer clarity on an emotion. But these icons do not always deliver our intent in reliable ways. And if I don't respond immediately to your text, is it because I'm frustrated and trying to ignore you? Or is it because I'm in a meeting or driving and not able to text? High channel richness with its immediate feedback allows you to read the person and get a sense as to how they are receiving the message. High channel richness also allows you to personalize the message, to smile, to nod, and give some assurance that you understand the message and that they understand what you're saying as well, or to show immediate disapproval or discontent so you can react quickly and help settle the issue. Having no written record can also be a disadvantage, though. Recently, I sent a text to my dean about whether I could donate money to my relative's campaign for public office. Weber State faculty have some nuanced rules about donations and advocating for candidates for office, so I thought I would check. My dean found out the answers I sought and sent them to me in a formal email instead of responding through text. This helped me and him to have a formal record if there were ever any questions going forward, without us having to access our texts, some of which are more personal and informal text, so it was good to have that in a formal email. High channel richness is also tricky in terms of broad dissemination. For example, when I communicate to students about content and due dates on assignments, for example, syllabus items, I send that information through Canvas, low channel richness, so I can disseminate the information quickly and have a record of disseminating it. Imagine if I had to explain the syllabus to each student in a personal conversation or phone call. That would be absurd. But what if one of you gets into a tricky situation that requires sharing of rich information and details about certain circumstances? Then we'd probably want to chat in person or by phone to make sure we understood each other. Which form of communication is better? It depends on your purposes. Neither form of communication is inherently better than the other. It is context specific and based on the circumstances. It's important to select the appropriate medium and then to communicate effectively within that medium. Those who do so have communication competence, which is an individual's ability to effectively use communication behaviors in a given context. Communication competence leads to communication fidelity, which is the degree of correspondence between the message intended by the source and the message understood by the receiver. Those with communication competence are especially effective with nonverbal communication and often have high levels of emotional intelligence. Nonverbal communication tells body movements and gestures, touch, facial expressions, and eye contact. Leaning backward and having palms up can show openness. Leaning forward can show interest. Folding arms, crossing legs, and pointing can show defensiveness. Appropriate touch, which is welcomed touch, can signal warmth, but create major problems if the touch is not welcomed. Facial expressions such as a smile can signal joy, but also suggest suspicion or lack of intelligence, depending on cultural norms and the context of the relationship. Eye contact can signal trust, but also show disrespect or attempts to intimidate. So nonverbal communication needs to be navigated with an abundance of caution. For those skilled at it, they can use it to achieve tremendous success and emotional connection with others. I have an uncle who has high levels of emotional intelligence, and he often seeks to chat in person. We work on a research team together, and he often wants to meet in person. Why? He is an effective face-to-face communicator and wants to take advantage of it. He's highly persuasive when using nonverbal communication. He can soften someone who's frustrated, deliver bad news with a calm demeanor, and gauge the mood of the room as he contemplates telling a joke or making light of a situation. He leans forward to show interest. maintains non-defensive postures, and engages in appropriate levels of eye contact. He also understands that written communication can be misunderstood in terms of tone and intent, especially when discussing sensitive issues. He's held positions of high responsibility in his life and has learned to not write things down that are sensitive or might be taken out of context or cause others to feel bad if they read them from an unintended perspective. He attributes much of his success to the manner in which he engages in non-verbal communication. In fact, if we can't chat face to face, he prefers chatting on the phone, keeping the communication channel high in channel richness. In fact, after I send him a text or an email, he often will call me and want to talk about it, if it's not practical to meet in person. He jokes that he doesn't know how to text, but he really does. He just doesn't want to put certain things in writing, even if it's just in a text. On the other hand, I have a colleague who's very poor at nonverbal communication. He comes across as aggressive, impatient, and even a bit out of his depth in terms of expertise. But he can write pretty effectively and explain things pretty well using low channel richness. As he is trying to get better with nonverbal communication, he needs to consider ways to limit the context in which his nonverbal behaviors are on display. Nonverbal behaviors can be practiced and perfected over time, so be careful with those who might want to not be authentic in their display of nonverbal behaviors. Those who can communicate that you can trust them when in reality you cannot trust them. So those who are especially skilled at nonverbal communication can manipulate, lie, and even deceive. In addition, as we work on increasing our emotional intelligence, we often naturally get better with our nonverbal communication, because such behaviors can often be a manifestation of the emotions we are experiencing at the time, meaning that poor nonverbal communication might very well indicate poor ability to regulate emotion, which is going to spill out into our nonverbal behavior. Active listening is an essential part of effective communication. Passive listening, on the other hand, is not really paying attention, while resistant listening is looking for a fight or seeking ways to get out of the conversation. Active listening, however, is paying attention, asking open-ended questions such as, how do you feel? What do you think? Or asking probing questions such as, can you tell me more about that? How does that work? Or requesting clarification, paraphrasing, expressing genuine emotions, while also welcoming the expression of genuine emotions from others, meaning you're willing to say how you feel and allow others to say how they feel too. You're also summarizing what you thought was conveyed by the other person. For example, you might say, Joe, it sounds like you're frustrated because you had to work over the weekend, did not hear back from coworkers on an important part of the presentation, and had to finish the project without much guidance from your supervisor. Is that correct? Active listening leads to those being listened to feel understood and validated while experiencing high levels of role clarity and engagement. It also helps them feel connected to you emotionally, more likely to be satisfied with their job, and more committed to their organization. Active listening helps identify sources of conflict and increase conflict resolution. Active listening helps us better understand what the person is saying and perhaps not saying, but implying through their nonverbal communication. Active listening helps us discern what is being communicated by the sender and helps us better understand how they might be feeling as well. What we say matters. If we trigger defensiveness, employees will become less engaged, less teachable, and less committed to the job. They will also like us less. However, the opposite is true. If we communicate well, they'll be more engaged, more teachable, and more committed to the job if we can help them shift toward non-defensiveness. Nobody likes to feel attacked. If we can use caution in the words we use and the approach we take, we can tap into the positive outcomes associated with non-defensiveness. As shown on this slide, the following are more likely to lead toward defensiveness versus non-defensiveness. For example, being evaluative. Your work is sloppy. That's defensiveness. Versus descriptive. Your work was late. As we look at being controlling, you need to do something, versus empowering. What do you think about doing something? You don't want to be neutral. Don't worry about missing whatever it is they're missing, because that's not going to hold them accountable. But we do want to be empathetic. I sense disappointment about whatever it is they might be disappointed about. We don't want to communicate a sense of superiority. I've worked here 20 years versus equality. Let's solve this problem together. We also want to avoid high levels of certainty, especially as we're critiquing. Your idea will never work. That uses absolute terminology and is likely not going to be effective. Versus open. I'm willing to consider that possibility. Next, we're going to look at two potential contradictions: power posing and powerless communication. First, watch the power posing TED Talk. The link is on this slide. With power posing, individuals demonstrate confidence, command of the situation, and expertise in their body language and presence in the room. In turn, body language predicts future success because our presence in the room shapes how we are perceived by others. We act confident, so others assume we're confident. And because we influence ourselves with our nonverbal behavior, meaning our nonverbal behaviors communicate to our brain that we actually are confident, so we feel confident. We are priming ourselves to be confident. For example, as we are open and large, we feel like we can take risks, we can be assertive, and we do not experience stress about feeling inadequate. On the other hand, as we are closed and small in our posture, we feel overly cautious, passive, or even cowardly and anxious. As we practice power posing, we get better at it. We learn how to do it better to influence our audience and to influence or to condition ourselves. We might think that the last time I walked into the room and did these things, and I was confident and power posed, things went well. So they'll likely go well again. As we do this, we access latent competencies. We attain the confidence to make proclamations with passion and authority. We gain motivation to learn the material and even higher levels of expertise, and suddenly find ourselves connecting with the audience and speaking with great fluidity, charm, and charisma. Now let's talk about the potential contradiction to power posing: powerless communication. Watch the powerless communication video. The link is on this slide. Powerless communication is being strategically vulnerable, engaging in a bit of self-deprecation, and treating others as the experts in order to connect with them, relate with them, and help them to become more teachable. Powerless communication can help establish the legitimacy of certain issues. If you are open to different perspectives and acquiescent to other ideas, you can also gain credibility for the most important issues. This would entail deferring to others often, but also standing firm on the issues most important to you. Socrates is thought to have done this on occasion, as he asked the other experts of his time about their perspectives and understanding of a certain issue. They would define the issue and provide examples. He did a lot of listening and asking of questions in order to learn what others knew and assess the extent to which they understood a certain topic, which is often much less than his own understanding. But he allegedly did not always call them out on this. He listened to their perspective and let them be the experts in teaching. In the video, Adam Grant shares a personal story about where he gave a presentation to Air Force colonels. In his first attempt, he tried to engage in power posing to prove that he was an expert and show immense confidence. But this was a room full of other power posers, powerful individuals, and he soon found himself in an awkward position. feeling he had failed to deliver an effective message. In fact, in the reviews after this first training, they confirmed this fear. The colonel said he missed the needs of the audience and that they gained very little from the discussion, but were confident that he had learned a lot from them. A horrible review for a consultant trying to prove his worth. What had gone wrong? He tried to be an imposing and domineering presenter to an audience full of imposing and domineering participants. And he admittedly looked 12 years old. He tried to play on the playground and was not equipped to do so. He awakened their competitive natures and caused them to feel that his expertise and experience was in competition with their expertise and experience, but not a very fair competition for him. So why make it a competition? Why create the setting to potentially create an adversarial relationship, causing others to feel that you think they need to learn from you and your brilliance? We need to be very careful with power posing because it can present a threat to the audience and they may not respond favorably. Adam Grant got a second chance with a similar but different group of colonels. He tried a dramatically different approach. He joked about his youthful appearance and conceded their high levels of expertise. He cast himself as someone with some potential nuance and interesting information that might be valuable to them. He cast himself as a supplemental help to them, to add to their wealth of extensive and well-earned knowledge and decision-making capacity. Following the second presentation, this is an example of the feedback he received. Although junior in experience, he dealt with the studies in an interesting way. He received highly positive reviews the second go-round. There's an interesting study for you to consider that seems relevant to the idea of powerless communication. An individual is trying to convince a group that a flashlight, among several other survival-type tools and materials, needs to be rated higher than those materials. Under one condition with the study, the individual said, the flashlight needs to be rated higher. It is the only reliable night signaling device. Under the other condition, the individual said, do you think the flashlight should maybe be rated higher? It may be a pretty reliable night signaling device. Which statement is more convincing to you? The study participants chose the second, the one that is more reflective of powerless communication. It won out over the first condition that is more reflective of power posing. There are some conditions under which power posing is especially effective. If you're in a large room with a lot of participants. Why? The large room makes it difficult to connect with those in the room, to look them in the eye and to empathize with them, and to be strategically vulnerable. As such, the small room, the 20 to 30 student class, or anything smaller, is ripe for powerless communication. It also depends on the certainty of the topic being covered. If you're teaching stats, math, physics, or another hard science, where there tends to be a bit more certainty, power posing can work well. If you are in an organizational behavior class where there's a lot of room for interpretation and a lot of contingency variables and caveats, you might see the most success with powerless communication, asking whether or not something might be true under certain situations with specific parameters and boundary conditions. Effective communicators are great storytellers. Watch the storytelling video. The link is on this slide. Stories are memorable. 63% remember a story, while only 5% remember statistical data. Stories are a form of soft or powerless communication. Stories come across as a suggestion, not a command. So you feel like you are in charge as you hear a story. Then you are primed to put yourself in the shoes of the person in the story. Great stories induce two primary emotions: distress, which is associated with the release of cortisol, and empathy, which is associated with the release of oxytocin. An effective way to foster distress is to create suspense or anticipation, leading to the release of cortisol. Cortisol then leads to increased focus, motivation, and engagement. An effective way to generate empathy is to get others to consider the possibility that what is happening to the individual in the story could happen to them, or even just to get them to imagine what it might feel like to have such an experience. One of the key capacities we have as human beings is to be able to imagine the future, to envision hope, or to see despair. When we envision hope or see despair and anticipate certain emotions, we can project how it might feel and begin to feel it. This is empathy. Feeling with others and their suffering because there are mirror neurons that enable the emotions of others to be contagious to us, to spread to us. Empathy drives oxytocin, which creates generosity, trust, and an emotional bond. Cortisol sets the stage for oxytocin, and they both build off of each other. So having both cortisol and oxytocin is a powerful cocktail of hormones. Cortisol takes us to the climax of the story, while oxytocin follows to resolve the issue introduced, or to help us feel a sense of calm, to feel that all was right in the world. Blockbuster movies often utilize the release of cortisol. They capture your attention and get you on the edge of your seat, perhaps hoping the villain gets caught, while drawing on the release of oxytocin, such as seeing the couple fall in love, watching the family be reunited, or seeing a wrong that is finally made right, seeing justice prevail. Storytelling is a powerful tool. Stories give us the satisfaction of walking in the shoes of another, learning something new without having to endure the entire experience, where we place ourselves in their situation, but only for a time. Storytelling helps listeners become emotionally invested. For example, scholars found that release of both cortisol and oxytocin through storytelling predicts who will donate money to a charity. Stories get us to yearn for the anticipated change and find an increased sense of hope. But great stories can also cause us to lose a degree of our objectivity. Effective stories can be highly manipulative as well. So if we couple a great story with statistical data, perhaps empirical data that demonstrates a causal relationship between two things, for example, that empathy leads to better performance over time, or that forgiveness leads to better emotional and physical health, we can tell a great story about empathy and substantiate that story with observable data. The combination of a great story with reliable data is particularly powerful because it accesses all the benefits noted previously while mitigating the risk of being manipulated. Make sure you watch the 17 Camels video. The link is on this slide. The parable of the 17 camels goes like this. A father from the Middle East passes away and leaves his 17 camels to his 3 sons. The prearranged allotment is as follows. Son 1 gets 1/2 the camels, which is 8.5. Son 2 gets 1/3 of the camels, which is 5.7. And son 3 gets 1/9 of the camels, which is 1.9. This is a dilemma, because the camels do not divide evenly. Not knowing exactly how to proceed, they consult a wise woman and ask for her help. She says, I don't know if I can help you that much, but you can have one of my camels if this is of any value to you. They take the camel, so they have 18 camels. The new arrangement is as follows. Son 1 gets half the camels, which is 9. Son 2 gets 1/3 of the camels, which is 6. And son 3 gets 1/9 of the camels, which is 2. With 9, 6, and 2 camels being used and everyone receiving their fair share, they have used a total of 17 camels. So they return the camel back to the wise woman. This wise woman helps them go to the balcony, the figurative place where those involved can rethink the dilemma, cool off, and collaborate regarding a path forward, in this case to come up with the 18th camel, that helps them settle the mathematical equation, but is actually not necessary in the end. This third side, or dispassionate and more objective view of this conflict, or going to the balcony, helps those in the conflict look at the situation with fresh eyes. Perhaps it's a third party, perhaps members of key stakeholders in the surrounding community. Having observers serve as this third side can help them go to the balcony. But it's also possible to get to the balcony on your own. The three sons could have just rounded up mathematically so everyone gets a slight bump up by a few tenths. Perhaps not entirely fair. They could sell the camels and then divide the money evenly. Also, the father might have foreseen the struggle and not left an odd number of camels to his children. The presenter talks about spending some time with an ancient tribe in South Africa, the San community. They are a hunter-gatherer society. They typically hunt with poison arrows, but when they have a disagreement or conflict, someone, the third side, hides the poison arrows so they cannot use them. Then they work at a resolution until they find a productive way to move forward. It might also be possible for those directly involved in the conflict to take account of their own arrows and simply determine not to ever use them on each other without interventions, or the hiding of the poison arrows being necessary, or perhaps hide their own arrows as they let cooler and heads prevail. Those involved in the conflict can be reaction machines and get caught up in the fog of the conflict. For example, the presenter talked about how anger can cause us to give the best speech you will ever regret giving. But those with emotional intelligence and self-control can learn to escape to the third side on their own, or to go to the balcony on their own. I'll share one more example. There's a case of a well-intended farmer who wanted to make sure each of his 4 kids got an equal share of his farm. Each child was given a share of the farm, stock valued at $50,000. The farmer assumed everyone would proceed in a rational, trustworthy way. Then one of the farmer's daughters died. Then her husband died. Then the farmer died. One of the grandkids, whose parents had both passed away, decided that he wanted money from the farm right now. In fact, he demanded that he and his siblings get this share of the farm in terms of real estate estimate and not farm use estimate, which meant that he would get a lot more money for the land if you were going to build houses on it instead of farm the land. And he promised a long and ugly court trial in order to get his way. Not wanting to have a conflict, the farmer's son, who was farming the land, gave this family the real estate assessment, which was about $85,000. This prompted the other 2 families to want to get paid out as well. The farm simply could not afford such payments in such a condensed period of time. These payments caused the son farming the land to go into insurmountable debt, and also to have to pay much higher on taxes, which compounded his debt each year. He also had to mortgage off other parts of his farm in order to pay for these payments. So a farm that had been in the black for years and years and generations suddenly was now in debt due to these families wanting money. The bank eventually claimed all the land. Years later, the farm was sold by the bank for about $7 million. Had they been able to hold on to the farm, the families of the 4 siblings could have eventually divided the land up for about $1.75 million each. But instead of claiming the money, the greedy family got $85,000. And if you divide that up per child in this family, it meant that they each got a little over $4,000 more than they would have received. So for a little bit more than $4,000, they severed family relationships, violated the moral standards they had been taught, and missed out on much more money. And they lost their family farm. What went wrong? The well-intended farmer who divided up the farm in the first place put the farm at risk. He was essentially asking his son, who had farmed the land, to assume an additional $150,000 in debt, which turned out to be $185,000 due to the greedy grandson. $185,000 in 1980 is almost $600,000 in current dollars. So it would have been virtually impossible for a small farm to absorb this type of debt and still survive. The son who ended up farming the land felt that his father's dying wish was that he farmed the land, so he felt an obligation to do so. The grandson demanded extra payment, intimidated others, and got them to be fearful of battling him in court. They became conflict averse and afraid. Everyone involved paid a heavy price for this conflict. They needed a way to go to the balcony so they could see the high cost of painful family relationships that become toxic, and the high cost that they would all pay financially as well. Conflict is defined as the process by which individuals perceive that others have taken some action that has a negative effect on their interest. Conflict is part of life, especially in organizations where we work to accomplish personal goals with people we might not know, might not like, and might not share the same goals. Conflict may result in intense feelings or discomfort and animosity, and we might even have a natural impulse to settle the score. We might have a natural inclination to seek revenge and to hold on to our anger. So conflict can be difficult. Conflict is often due to differences in values, personality, and or goals. Based on what you learned in previous lessons about the stability of values, you might already know that differences in values can bring about the most severe and deeply entrenched conflicts. Consider the values wheel that we discussed previously, and also shown on this slide. If you value individual achievement and self-interested actions, you may also be at odds with those who value selflessness and transcending selfish desires to serve others. Such a conflict, inasmuch as it would be based on values, gets to the core of who you are as a person, and would likely be seen as worth fighting for in the long term. Similarly, we see deep-rooted conflicts as it relates to those open to change and those seeking to hold to traditions and previous ways of being. We often see values-based conflicts playing out in the political arena. Conflicts that occur based on personality can be severe and uncomfortable, but are not typically as deeply rooted as values-based conflicts. Two people might be in a conflict because one is an extrovert and the extrovert keeps getting in their space, when the introvert would just like to be able to complete tasks through email interaction, or might prefer to resolve conflicts without so much talking and certainly without so much drama. Perhaps one person is aggressive and the other person is passive, or would just like to flatter others to smooth things over. Perhaps you are proactive and the other person likes safety and predictability. Although potentially severe, conflicts due to personality might often be a matter of one's approach to conflict versus the content of the conflict. Values-based conflict often has to do with the content, so it can get pretty heavy. Goal-based conflict can be resolved by shifting goals of the individuals. For example, if I'm the leader of a sales team and I see a lot of conflict brewing because of a perceived cutthroat environment regarding sales commission, I can shift the way I reward you and thus shift the goals you pursue, shifting from individual sales commission to team sales commission, for example. Or if I'm a CEO and see conflict regarding the way certain employees approach customers, with some providing great customer service and others trying to be as efficient as possible, even if it means disregarding the needs of the customers, I can modify our reward system to accommodate customer service scores, meaning I can pay those who provide the best customer service. This would likely shift the goals of most people. For example, when I was a college student, I worked for MarketStar. We helped an external client generate contacts for education-based fundraising. This client was a bit aggressive and wanted us to focus on the quantity of clients, even if that meant providing poor service to those clients. Our leader at MarketStar refused to involve the MarketStar name in such a scheme, so we shifted away from this client and found one that supported the goals of the company. This is also an example of how goals can be an extension of the organization's or individual's values, and thus be more likely to lead to deep-rooted conflicts over time. A key takeaway is that the goals can often change and are less stable than values and personality, and therefore the conflict is likely to be less severe. But if goals are based on values, this can increase the severity of the conflict because it links back to values. The severity and the extent to which a conflict is deeply rooted and entrenched is likely going to go back to values because our values are so stable and enduring over time. Historically, conflict in organizations was often viewed as problematic and to be avoided, especially under the old psychological contract where there was a large gap in terms of power distance between employees and managers. One reason is that conflict can reduce the power distance between employees and managers. Just a few decades ago, and in some instances even still today, the power distance between employees and managers was intentionally large, encouraging employees to not challenge managers and not disagree with them. This was aimed at controlling employees and discouraging them from seeking too much autonomy or too much authority. So conflict would have been seen as a major threat to this system under the old psychological contract. Then we began to see some acceptance of conflict, some conflict, as long as it was not too much. This is depicted in the graph on the top right of this slide, where the optimal level of conflict is moderate conflict. Too little and you don't perform well, and too much and you get distracted and annoyed by the conflict. Finally, we're now in a position where we encourage moderate levels of certain types of conflict, as shown in the graph on the lower left of this slide. First, task conflict. This is disagreement over ideas and nuanced decisions. This is effective if it's moderate. Relationship conflict, which is character attacks and spiteful arguing, is going to reduce performance. The more intense the relationship conflict, or the degree of contempt, the worse the performance. And then finally, process conflict, which is failing to establish norms and agreed upon procedures and routines, or failing to have an effective storming phase that leads to effective norms. If you have conflict regarding the process, this is also going to lead to reduced performance in a similar pattern to that of relationship conflict. The more intense the process conflict, or the degree of misaligned processes, the worse the performance. And as discussed previously, the timing of the conflict is also important. In the forming stage, you want lower conflict. In the storming stage, you want moderately high conflict. And in the norming stage, you want conflict to be lowering and becoming resolved. In the performing stage, you want lower conflict, unless, of course, it's interrupted with an intentional, punctuated equilibrium, as discussed in previous chapters. And in the adjourning stage, you want lower conflict. As you can see, it's not easy to get conflict right. It needs to come in the right type and right dosage, while also coming at the right time. And even if you do get all of this right, all types of conflict, task, relationship, and process, tend to lead to lower job satisfaction because we experience cognitive dissonance and tend to not like this dissonance. So what can be good for you, such as cognitive dissonance, is not always comfortable and enjoyable at the time. We also know that task conflict and relationship conflict have a correlation of about 0.22. This means when you introduce healthy task conflict, you risk introducing the unhealthy relationship conflict. In fact, we have a bias toward this. Your boss engages in a critical review of your performance. This creates dissonance. You don't like it. And then you seek to protect yourself from criticism. What do? You conclude that your performance was actually good and tell yourself that the poor review is only due to the fact that your boss does not like you as a person. And suddenly you have relationship conflict instead of task conflict. The contact hypothesis proposes that the more time spent with a group, the less conflict within that group. This is due to the likelihood that you will start to see commonalities with others. The more you interact with them and get to know them, you're more likely to start to see where you might have similarities, where you might have made faulty assumptions, and see the positive characteristics associated with those you initially viewed negatively. So the more time you spend together, the more likely you are to get along because you start looking for reasons to get along. This is also associated with a self-preservation mechanism. The more we interact with others, the more we want to see them as being similar to us. We don't hang out with people who are not like us, and the more likely we are to view them as ourselves as being interdependent with them. So a great way of managing conflict can simply be to get the group of people together more often. Another way to manage conflict is to ensure psychological safety. Psychological safety is being able to share beliefs, concerns, and ideas without fear of negative consequences to self-image, status, or career. Meaning you normalize conflict as being a natural part of discussions, and it's more likely to become a healthy conflict, where individuals feel appreciated, known, and understood, helping them see that their values align with your values. Some of you might be familiar with the movie The Karate Kid. Daniel LaRusso moves from New Jersey to California where he does not fit in very well. See the top left picture on this slide where he is getting beat up by those in skeleton costumes. His misfortune is made worse by the fact that he starts dating the former girlfriend of the leader of this group and easily the best fighter of the local karate dojo, Johnny Lawrence. After Daniel gets beat up and Mr. Miyagi saves him from getting seriously hurt, they go to the karate dojo and ask for a reprieve from the beatings until the karate tournament. Then Daniel's karate training begins. Daniel asks Mr. Miyagi to train him and agrees to be trained in any way Mr. Miyagi wishes. Daniel agrees to be compliant with anything he's asked to do. Then he waxes cars, paints the fence, and sands the floor of the deck, and shows up to paint the house. Watch the Karate Kid video, the link is on this slide. In this video, we see how Daniel is upset now with Mr. Miyagi. He doesn't feel that he's being treated fairly. Although he agreed to follow the training prescribed by Mr. Miyagi, he is now having serious doubts. He thinks he's just doing odd jobs for Mr. Miyagi, and that he's being taken advantage of, and not really being trained to fight, and not being treated fairly. Based on your perspective, is the conflict shown in this video clip good conflict? At first blush, it might not look like good conflict. Daniel's insubordinate, cursing and really accusing Mr. Miyagi of making him do things that only improve his home and yard, and not really teaching him karate. After a series of outbursts, Daniel starts to walk away and threatens to go home. Then Mr. Miyagi sharply calls him back and has him rehearse everything he's been doing for the last several weeks. Wax on, wax off, paint the fence, sand the floor, and now paint the house. To Daniel's surprise, these tasks were teaching him karate moves and teaching him how to block punches. Mr. Miyagi takes him through a series of kicks and punches to demonstrate this point. Perhaps the pivotal point of this lesson is when Daniel threatens to go home and uses some choice language on his way out. Mr. Miyagi could have called him an entitled kid and told him to keep going and not to come back, not ever to come back. But he doesn't. He could have yelled at him for being disrespectful and juvenile, but he doesn't. Mr. Miyagi endures a forceful and domineering response from Daniel while staying calm and focusing on teaching. Mr. Miyagi maintains a boundary as to what's acceptable while also showing Daniel some respect and some patience. This is not perfectly handled, but there are several elements of effective conflict, as Mr. Miyagi shows an abundance of patience and high levels of emotional intelligence. This sets the stage for highly effective teaching and allows Daniel to become teachable. With conflict, sometimes we need to be patient enough to let others vent their interfering emotions, and wise enough to not vent our interfering emotions, but instead to focus on teaching a concept and making a point to coach and mentor others, to provide evidence that what we are teaching is helping the student get better, that it's helping them improve, instead of rebuking and shaming at the first sign of resistance. If you can endure the initial resistance with patience and show expertise, the person you are trying to teach will likely become much more teachable and much more receptive. The term devil's advocate comes from the Catholic faith. During the canonization process, the devil's advocate was assigned to take a position against the canonization of the candidate, to be against admitting the deceased person to sainthood. This entails bringing up potential flaws in their character, being skeptical of their good works, and looking for holes in the evidence supporting the candidate. The idea was that only the best candidates for canonization would make it through this level of scrutiny, and those individuals granted sainthood would be truly deserving of the prestigious honor. In modern times, the devil's advocate plays a similar role in groups and teams. They challenge, disagree, and offer different points of view. The most effective type of devil's advocacy is assigned advocacy, where it truly becomes planned or programmed conflict. It's risky being a devil's advocate and bringing up the shortcomings and the flaws. Group members might take offense and feel insulted. If, however, you assign the devil's advocate, this softens the blow because they are just doing their job. They are just trying to help the team improve and have been mandated to do so. The devil's advocate disrupts groupthink, offers a fresh perspective, and is often the person willing to say that the emperor has no clothes. Regarding this last comment, you might be familiar with Hans Christian Andersen's story, The Emperor's New Clothes. According to the story, many years ago there was an emperor, so exceedingly fond of new clothes that he spent all of his money on being well dressed. Many people would visit the emperor and try to sell the very best clothes to him. One day, 2 swindlers came to town and said they could weave the most magnificent fabrics imaginable. Not only were their colors and patterns uncommonly fine, but clothes made of this cloth had a wonderful way of becoming invisible to anyone who was unfit for his or her office, or who was unusually stupid. Those would be just the clothes for me, thought the emperor. If I wore them, I would be able to discover who in my empire was unfit for their office, and I could tell the wise people from the foolish. Yes, I certainly must get some of the stuff woven for me right away. He paid the 2 swindlers a large sum of money to start work at once. Wanting to get regular updates on the progress, he sent some of his most trusted advisors to see the clothes. As the swindlers presented the clothes, these trusted advisors could not see anything. If they were using any thread at all, the thread was invisible to them. Not wanting to be seen as unfit for their office or unusually stupid, the trusted advisors pretended to see the exquisite patterns and beautiful colors. Finally, the emperor went down to try on the clothes. To his dismay, he could not see the material. Of course, fearful that he would be deemed unfit for his office or seen as unusually stupid, he too pretended to see exquisite patterns and beautiful colors. And he called for a procession through town so he could show off his new clothes. Hearing from his closest advisors, "How well your majesty's new clothes look. Aren't they becoming? That pattern so perfect. Those colors so suitable. It's a magnificent outfit. It's a remarkable fit, isn't it?" Everyone in the streets and windows said, "Oh, how fine are the emperor's new clothes. Don't they fit him to perfection?" Nobody would confess they couldn't see anything, for they would prove them either unfit for their position or a fool. No costume the emperor had worn before was ever such a complete success. "But he hasn't got anything on," a little child said. "Did you ever hear such innocent nonsense?" said the child's father. And one person whispered to another what the child had said. "He hasn't anything on. A child says he hasn't anything on." "But he hasn't got anything on," the whole town cried at last. The emperor shivered, for he suspected they were right. But he thought, this procession has got to go on. So he walked more proudly than ever as his noblemen held high his train that wasn't there at all. The role of the devil's advocate is to disrupt this type of faulty thinking from the outset, challenging the web of lies spun by the swindlers, helping all team members save face and not fall victim to the alluring and contagious groupthink. Dialectical inquiry is similar to devil's advocacy, but it's like having a team of devil's advocates. With dialectical inquiry, you divide the group into 2 teams. The first team advocates one side of the issue. Then the second team critiques this side and advocates against this side of the issue, pointing out the flaws in the first team's response and arguing in favor of the opposite side. In some ways, this can offer stronger effects than devil's advocacy alone because it is an entire subgroup of people advocating against one side of the issue. So more voices are added in opposition, and less conflict is likely to emerge against just one person. In this way, the first group offers a thesis or an original idea. The second group offers the antithesis or the opposite of what is being offered as the thesis. And then the first group uses the strong points made by the second group to create a synthesis, which takes all good points, even those that seem inconsistent with the initial position, to make the strongest position possible. A synthesized argument that has been refined and perfected. Just as devil's advocacy and dialectical inquiry are meant to increase conflict, nominal group technique aims to reduce conflict and mitigate dominating voices. With the nominal group technique, you generate ideas individually, share all ideas that were generated without attributing ideas to any one person. Then you discuss all the ideas, still without attributing ideas to any one person. And then you rank the ideas, also still without attributing ideas to any one person. The focus with the nominal group technique is that you do not associate any ideas with the person who initially generated the idea, so participants feel comfortable critiquing and praising ideas, and not feel pressured to agree with a bad idea put forward by the boss. This technique is an equalizing technique that tries to treat all individuals as being equally contributing partners in generating ideas. This is especially valuable when the group has a domineering boss who overly accepts his or her own ideas. I've participated in groups using the nominal group technique, and it can work really well. One of the challenges is that participants can still advocate for their own ideas in not so subtle ways, in effect revealing that a certain idea is their idea. If they do so, you've lost the use of the nominal group technique. I've seen this as well where we planned a meeting that would follow the nominal group technique, and then the boss simply pushed every idea that came up that was his, making it known to us his idea. It was ridiculous and a waste of time. A stricter version of the nominal group technique is to do all the feedback anonymously as well, such that you really do not have discussion and just put forward ideas anonymously. This allows for complete anonymity, but also raises the potential weakness of not having any group discussions at all, not drawing on the strengths of the group during an open discussion. You might have participated in anonymous polls and surveys in certain classes, where the most popular positions get highlighted and advanced and put into a word graph, similar to what is on the lower right side of this slide. This is a form of nominal group technique. It's trying to pull the group and allowing for anonymity. It helps you see the most popular words, phrases, or ideas, but does not do a very good job of vetting such ideas. So there's a delicate balance between anonymity and fully vetting ideas with candid feedback from all participants, because we are prone to defend our own ideas and have our own self-serving biases. Negotiation is a process by which individuals seek to advance their interests by collaborating with those they believe can help advance those interests. To help clarify the purpose of negotiation, consider the debilitating assumptions and empowering assumptions listed on this slide. One debilitating assumption is, I must fight for my position. This is debilitating because positions can get us to become too committed to a particular goal. For example, suppose my position is that I want to get a job that pays $80,000 in salary. That is my goal, my aspiration, and I'm going to do everything I can to achieve that goal. But what if an employer offers a job that would pay $75,000? To be consistent with my position, I would reject this offer. However, what if the job also offered great benefits, opportunities for promotion in the short term, end-of-year bonuses, merit-based pay raises, a retirement plan, a travel stipend, and use of a company car. This offer quickly becomes better than $75,000, even though it was still below my goal of an $80,000 salary. Fighting for a position of requiring a salary of $80,000 artificially fixes us to the goal or the aspiration. This is a position. On the other hand, exploring our interests is an empowering assumption because it allows us to consider factors we had not considered before or were not associated with our position, to consider factors that might advance our interests. Suppose I'm applying to Weber State to teach in the business school, and the school offers to pay me a salary of $120,000. But my position is to get paid the average salary of a business professor, which is $130,000. If basing my decision on my position, I reject the offer. But if I base my decision on advancing my own interest, I wait and see if Weber State can bundle or group together other elements that will advance my interests. For example, Weber State might offer 14% retirement pay each year, allow me to teach summer classes at $5,000 each class, maybe pay me $6,000 for each scholarly article I publish, or give me $2,500 to travel each year, and might provide a fellowship of $6,000 to those who are highly successful in teaching and conducting research. After these incentives, I soon see that there are different ways to advance my interests when these other elements are bundled together. Assuming you must negotiate everything separately can give you initially a sense of control because you are examining each component one by one and know exactly what you're getting for what you are giving. But if you can shift your thinking to negotiating in bundles, this can be empowering because you can get much more for both parties if you negotiate in bundles. This is the best way to advance the interests of both parties. A super simple example of negotiating in bundles is the negotiation between two people who are each entitled to half an orange. They could conclude to split the orange in half, and each party use half the orange juice. But what if both parties are not wanting orange juice? What if one of the parties wants to use the orange juice to make a tea or a zest? After discovering each other's interests, you might conclude to give one party the orange and the other party the orange peel. Bundling is also related to the faulty assumption that the pie is fixed, and the negotiation must be distributive. Whereas one person gains, the other person loses, a zero-sum game. Conversely, the empowering assumption that you can expand the pie and the negotiation can be integrative suggests that you can both win. It can be a win-win, that one person can get the entire orange while the other can get the peel. Assuming you can expand the pie also relates to creating synergies and creating resources together. Suppose the honors program approaches the business school and wants to have me teach an honors class. This would provide a faculty member to the honors program, but it would also take one faculty member away from the business school. Initially, this is framed as a win-loss situation. But what if the honors program has me design an honors leadership course that would be available to both honors students and business school students, where both programs would gain a faculty member teaching their students, and both honors students and business students could get to know each other and take classes together. This now becomes a win-win, and it adds a class option for students that they did not previously have. This is how we get to synergistic outcomes. The simple formula that mathematically is not correct, but when we look at synergy, this is what we have the potential to do, where 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 3, or at least the value of 3. Two parties coming together to achieve an outcome greater than the sum of its parts. Another debilitating assumption is that the other party should make the first offer. We often wait for the other person to say what they want from a negotiation. However, this approach may not advance our interests. Being the first mover can anchor the negotiation. This is an empowering assumption. Anchoring the negotiation refers to utilizing the anchoring effect to fix the negotiation. and determined what is offered first. For example, I was with a friend and we were trying to buy tickets to a football game. We first tried the secondary market, the non-official vendors selling outside on the outskirts of the stadium. My friend bought his ticket for $75 and was quite pleased with the deal he had made because he got the vendor to go lower from his initial price of $80. He went from $80 to $75 and sold him the ticket. The vendor had anchored the price of the ticket to $80. He did not sell it for $80, but he sold it close to $80. He had established $80 as a legitimate range, being close to the appropriate price range. I later bought my ticket from another vendor for $60 because I made the first offer, which was $50. I paid more than my offer, but I anchored this person to the lower price range. Another debilitating assumption is that we must choose between substance and relationships. However, the empowering assumption is that we can build relationships as we discover our interests, that we do not have to give up on the relationship in order to get what we want. Several years ago, my relative sold a property to another relative. The value of the property was $1 million. The person who sold the property agreed to receive payments over a series of monthly installments. But as the months went by, no payments were made. So one relative had given up the property but had not received any payment for it. He did not want to strain the relationship, so he did not say anything to the person who owed the monthly payments, who owed him $1 million, to the point that a year had gone by and no payment had been received. Another relative got involved and spoke candidly to the person who was late with his payments. He did not yell, shame, or belittle the person. He just told him in a kind and candid way that he had a responsibility to make the payments. This led to a more detailed conversation about the person's inability to pay and the need to sell the property to an entirely different party, resulting in the person who bought the property getting out of a jam and the person who sold the property finally getting paid. Without this intervention, the lack of payment would probably have gone on several more months, if not another year, hurting the relationship even more, all under the guise of helping the relationship and not wanting to rock the boat. Candor in negotiations can preserve your interests as well as the relationship. The best way to preserve relationships is to be kind and candid. If we are not kind, we risk hurt feelings. But if we are not candid, we risk a lack of justice and fairness, which will inevitably lead to strained relationships down the road. So why do we negotiate? Although contrary to what many people might assume, we never negotiate simply for agreement. The purpose of a negotiation should not be to find agreement at all costs, or even to feel a pressing need to find an agreement at all. In a negotiation, we need to understand our alternatives. In negotiation context, we often use the phrase, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is why having an offer for another job is so valuable when negotiating for another job. With another offer in hand, you know the terms and conditions of that job. You know what you're giving up if you take the other offer. For example, when I negotiated my job at Weber State, I had two other options. I could stay at West Point, or I could take a job at the University of Denver. I knew the terms and conditions of all three jobs and did not feel any pressure to accept any of the three jobs, because I knew my alternatives of walking away from the negotiation. The West Point job was prestigious, exciting, and what I was used to. The University of Denver job was the highest paying job, close to home, and would have allowed me to work with colleagues with similar research interests. But the Weber State job was the most attractive because it would mean I would return to my hometown and teach at my alma mater. Because I had these two other options, I was able to negotiate for the specific Weber State job with a degree of latitude. I knew I had two other highly desirable jobs in hand, and this allowed me to negotiate a $7,000 increase in base salary, and also negotiate the other components in a bundle: salary, travel money, teaching load, specific classes I would be teaching, summer teaching, etc. Having two other jobs in hand also increased the legitimacy of my candidacy for the job at Weber State, allowing them to conclude that Bryant is highly recruited by several other schools and therefore is a credible candidate. An offer is legitimate if those who make the offer can actually deliver what they negotiate. One of my friends negotiated his first job out of graduate school with the department chair in a business school. They settled on his salary and all the other components. He was content with this negotiation and made plans to teach at the university. He declined several other offers from schools. Then he received a formal job offer from the dean. This offer was for $20,000 less than his negotiated salary. When he asked about it, the dean said the department chair did not have the authority to negotiate the previous level of salary, essentially saying the negotiation was not legitimate. Left without any options, he took the job, but was never committed to the university after that. He left the university just a couple years after taking the job. This failed negotiation hurt his interests and the interests of the university. We also want to enhance relationship quality when we negotiate. On the previous slide, I talked about the debilitating assumption that you cannot have an effective negotiation and still maintain effective relationships. The ideal is to enhance relationship quality in the negotiation process. For example, when I was a management consultant, one of my jobs was to put together our bid for the work we were going to perform on a certain project. In developing a bid, you need to know the salaries of the employees you are including in the bid, so you know how much their work hours will cost the company, and how much to include in the bid to do their work. As I became familiar with the salaries of my coworkers, I soon realized that I was getting paid less than some of my coworkers. They had been with the company longer than me and had more work experience, but I was doing more than them on the project. So I set a meeting with the chairman of our company. I made my case for a raise. The chairman kindly listened to me, make my case, and we had a great chat. But he also said that before he would give me a raise, he wanted me to take some time to make an even more compelling case for the raise. He also noted that my salary had doubled over the course of the last year. So over the course of the next several weeks, I went to work to build a more compelling case, a case that I should be given a raise. I demonstrated that I had more position authority than my coworkers. They reported to me. I represented our company in face-to-face interactions with our clients, while these coworkers did lower-level tasks and functions. I had several very strong record in developing bids. We won the bids I developed and were highly profitable on the contracts once we got them. I had developed strong relationships with our clients, and I understood how to complete complex costing models. I had participated in high-level internal meetings and was the most favorably recommended employee by the CEO. After the few conversations over the course of the next several weeks, the chairman said he would give me a raise, and he wanted to promote me to be the deputy director of the entire competitive sourcing function of the company, or the entire management consulting arm of our company. This meant I would now participate as a member of the senior management team, a VP level function, and receive another substantial raise. These conversations helped develop a strong bond between me and the chairman of the company, and it helped show him that I could utilize emotional intelligence when I was disappointed with his first answer, that I would not pout and throw a tantrum for not getting the salary I wanted, but I would go to work to prove my case, while nurturing a strong relationship of trust with him. This negotiation actually helped me get a promotion sooner than anticipated, and it helped me get a clear perspective as to how the various functions of our company related with each other. The negotiation prepared me for additional responsibilities and solidified a strong friendship with the chairman. In fact, it was the same chairman who would later write a very strong letter of recommendation for me to attend graduate school, where I would go get my PhD. Negotiations can teach you a lot about a person, how they interact with you, how they act when disappointed, what they value, how they go about making their case for something they want. You can learn a lot about their interests. In fact, negotiating with a company before you ever work for them can give you a great glimpse into their culture. You can see if they know how to build win-win situations, if they can build relationships of trust, and forge respectful interactions with those they employ. Some companies look like great places to work until you find yourself in a negotiation or disagreement with them that might require a delicate balance between the interests of both parties. Seeing if you can find a way to align those interests and elevate the interest of both parties going forward. Effective negotiation entails inquiry and advocacy. With inquiry, individuals seek to validate the perspective of the other person and help them feel heard and understood, while also gathering valuable information to help them know how to navigate the negotiation. You're more likely to be successful in a negotiation if you understand the needs of the person with whom you are negotiating, are able to meet those needs, and able to satisfy your needs as well. You are better positioned to meet those needs if you engage in effective inquiry. Inquiry entails active listening. Recall that active listening is paying attention, asking open-ended questions such as, how do you feel? What do you think? Asking probing questions. Can you tell me more about that? How does that work? Requesting clarification, paraphrasing, expressing genuine emotions and welcoming the expression of genuine emotions from others, and also summarizing what they thought was conveyed by the other person. For example, Jane, it sounds like you're concerned that this project might overextend your company, and you feel like our company should take on more of the workload without receiving any additional payment. Is that correct? This allows you to clarify what they're suggesting so you don't make assumptions. Advocacy is where you make an effort to offer a compelling rationale for what you would like to receive in the negotiation. With advocacy, you teach the negotiation partner, provide role clarity to them so they understand their role, and prepare them to be an active listener to you. As you express your views, you first ensure that the individual feels heard and understood, meaning you do not proceed to advocacy until you've engaged in active listening. Active listening sets the stage for them to be an active listener themselves because they feel a need to reciprocate your active listening and feel a closer connection to you after having been validated, and are more likely to listen to you with a willingness to learn and understand. Those who are effective at advocacy likely have high emotional intelligence and are able to read the emotions of the person. As such, there is a back and forth between inquiry and advocacy. You often start with inquiry and actively listen to their perspective and then proceed to advocacy, being sensitive to when you need to shift back to inquiry to learn more or to do more to help them feel understood. This is a delicate balance, and navigating this process with precision and sensitivity often means the difference between a successful negotiation and a failed negotiation. Successful negotiations are about relationships. Can you connect with the person while pursuing their interest and understanding their interest and offering something of substance to them?